I remember that day as if it were yesterday. A basketball game was being played in the high school gymnasium. After the game, I was sitting alone in the bleachers reading a book when Dennis appeared before me. He was the star of the basketball team and always popular. Yet, at that moment, he chose to speak to me. "Ariana, I often see you reading here. What are you reading?" My heart skipped a beat at Dennis's smile. It's Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. What about you?" When I answered, he gave me a warm smile. "Me? I'm not really interested in much besides basketball. But is that book interesting?" From that day on, we gradually grew closer, and I started attending all his games. He, in turn, became interested in my love of reading, and we spent more time discussing books. After graduating high school, we naturally started dating. A few years later, we got married. The ceremony was held in a small church, blessed by our family and friends. The happiness of that day remains deeply etched in my heart. "I love you, Ariana," Dennis said, embracing me after the ceremony. Our married life was peaceful. I worked as a librarian, while Dennis built his career as an engineer at a local factory. We supported each other's dreams and grew together. Then our son, Ethan, was born. His birth brought even more light to our lives. Ethan was the embodiment of our love and our hope for the future. Every time we saw his smile, we felt blessed. "Mama, Papa." When Ethan spoke his first words, we cried tears of joy. Each time he gripped our hands with his tiny fingers, our joy in watching him grow increased. Our family bonds deepened, and we spent our days as a unified team. Picnics in the park, weekend camping trips, decorating for Christmas, all these moments became precious memories etched in our hearts. Ethan was an energetic, curious child. His smile was as bright as the sun, and his presence illuminated our world. We cherished each day as we watched him grow. However, in the midst of such happiness, we were about to face an unimaginable tragedy. It was an ordinary weekday. I had gone to pick up Ethan from kindergarten, and we were walking home hand in hand as usual. That day, Ethan was particularly cheerful, singing as he walked. "Mama, I played a lot in the park today. The teacher pushed me on the swing." "That's wonderful, Ethan. What would you like for dinner?" "Spaghetti would be great." We were having this simple conversation when it happened. Suddenly, the screech of car brakes pierced the air. Before I could turn around, Ethan's hand had slipped from mine. It took me several seconds to comprehend what had happened. A car had jumped the curb and struck Ethan. I screamed and rushed to him. He lay motionless, his eyes closed. "Ethan! Ethan!" I called his name repeatedly, but there was no response. Passers-by called for help, and the wait for the ambulance felt like an eternity. Ethan was rushed to the hospital and taken into surgery, but the doctor's expressions told me how serious it was. All I could do was pray. Dennis rushed to the hospital, and we held hands while waiting for news. Hours later, the doctor appeared and slowly shook his head. "I'm sorry. There was nothing we could do. Those words shattered our world. We couldn't accept the reality that Ethan was gone. His toys were still scattered in his room, and the silence without his voice only magnified our pain. Dennis and I sank into deep grief, finding it difficult even to comfort each other. Why did this have to happen? Dennis whispered through his tears. Ethan. I'm so sorry. If only Mama had been more careful. I kept blaming myself. Many friends and family gathered for Ethan's funeral to mourn his short life. But no matter how many people shared our grief, nothing could fill the void in our hearts. The months that followed were like living in a world drained of color. Though Dennis and I tried to support each other, we each carried our grief alone. Every time we remembered Ethan's smile, a crushing pain gripped our hearts. While we never got used to life without Ethan, we gradually learned to face forward. We came to believe that living each day preciously was the greatest tribute we could pay to him. It was an event that would change our lives completely. 7 years had passed since Ethan's accident, and while the grief never disappeared, we were slowly reclaiming our daily routine. That morning, I was brewing coffee in the kitchen as usual. Sunlight streamed through the window, and everything seemed peaceful. However, this tranquility was about to be broken by an unexpected visitor. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, there stood a police officer in uniform. Surprise and anxiety welled up in my chest. "Are you Mrs. Ariana Brown?" one officer asked. "Yes, I am." "Has something happened?" I replied hesitantly. "We've arrested a young boy who was trying to break into your house. He claims to be your son." I caught my breath at those words. I tried to process their meaning, but couldn't understand why my son, who had died 7 years ago, would be mentioned now. There must be some mistake. "My son passed away 7 years ago," I replied with a trembling voice. The officer looked confused but said, "Even so, would you mind coming to the police station to verify?" Though confused, I quickly put on my coat and decided to go to the station. Fear and anxiety swirled in my heart, but I knew I had to go to understand what was happening. At the police station, I saw the boy. However, he wasn't Ethan. The boy appeared wounded and wore tattered clothes. "Who are you?" I asked instinctively. The boy responded fearfully in a small voice, "I'm Ezra. I was just hungry. I'm really sorry." The officer continued explaining, "This boy is looking for his family, and somehow knew your address." As I listened to Ezra's story, I realized he wasn't just a lost child or vagrant. His eyes reflected deep sadness and desperation, suggesting there was something more serious behind his situation. "Why did you come to my house?" I asked Ezra. I just wanted someone to help me," Ezra replied with tears in his eyes. At that moment, I sensed something of Ezra's circumstances and felt strongly that I couldn't abandon him. That night, I returned from the police station and told Dennis about the day's events, about Ezra, how he was mistaken for Ethan, and his tragic situation. However, Dennis's reaction was different from what I had expected. Dennis, Listen about the boy I met at the police station today, I began, sitting on the living room sofa and taking a deep breath. His name is Ezra. He was caught trying to break into our house. From what I could see, it looks like he's being abused. Dennis picked up the TV remote, lowered the volume, and looked at me. Ezra. And why exactly did he come here? I don't know. But the fear and sadness in his eyes were real. I think we should try to help him somehow. Ariana, this is beyond us. We should leave it to the police. There was coldness in Dennis's voice. But he's not just some lost child or vagrant. He might be asking us for help. I pleaded desperately, remembering Ezra's tears. Dennis sighed deeply and looked away. Even if you say that, there's nothing we can do. Something about his response troubled me. I felt there was something hidden behind Dennis's attitude. That night, I couldn't sleep in bed. Dennis was acting different than usual. His cold attitude and unnatural distance bothered me endlessly. We had overcome grief together, so why did he suddenly feel so distant? As the night wore on, I became increasingly anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling that Dennis was hiding something. Was he really just indifferent to Ezra? Or was there something deeper going on? Dennis, are you really not concerned about Ezra at all? I finally confronted him. He turned away in the darkness and answered shortly, Ariana, let's go to sleep. We can think about this tomorrow. His words only increased my anxiety. When had Dennis started acting this way? I had no idea what he was thinking. I couldn't get Ezra out of my mind, tossing and turning all night. His sad eyes, trembling voice, and the fragments of his story were deeply etched in my heart. All night, I lay awake staring at Dennis's back, wondering what he was hiding. And I decided I needed to take action to find the answer. The next day, I received a call from the police station. Though filled with anxiety and tension, I went to the station to cooperate. There, more details about Ezra's situation were revealed. The police officer began speaking with a serious expression. We've made progress in our investigation of Ezra. After looking into his background, it appears that Ezra is your husband's son. What? I couldn't believe my ears. What do you mean? Ezra's mother is a woman named Jessica, and Ezra is the child born between Jessica and your husband. It appears Jessica was abusing Ezra, which is why he ran away and came to you. In that moment, my heart froze cold. I couldn't believe that Dennis had been unfaithful, and that the child born from that relationship was suffering so terribly. When I returned home, I couldn't stop crying from the shock of learning the truth. I confronted Dennis, who was waiting in the living room, with a trembling voice. Dennis, did you know about Ezra all along? He avoided my eyes, and a heavy silence followed. Finally, he sighed deeply and answered in a low voice. I knew. But there was nothing I could do. Nothing you could do. When your son was being abused. I shouted, shaking with anger. Why did you hide this from me? Dennis covered his face with a pained expression. Jessica was a one-time mistake. But Ezra was born as a result. When Jessica said she would raise him, I couldn't say anything. Those words filled me with despair and anger. I couldn't forgive Dennis for lying to me, and for how that lie had caused such deep sorrow. Ariana, please understand. I knew about Ezra's existence, but I never thought Jessica would be such a terrible mother. But now he's come to us. He's asking for help. I wiped my tears and strengthened my resolve. We need to think about what we can do to save Ezra. Dennis nodded silently, but his eyes reflected deep regret and pain. We vowed to do everything we could to help Ezra. But I sensed this would bring further trials to our relationship. I decided to welcome Ezra into our home. I tended to his wounds, provided warm meals, and tried my best to make him feel secure. Though Ezra was wary at first, he gradually began to open his heart. Ezra, where were you before you came here? I asked gently. After hesitating slightly, Ezra quietly answered, I went to see my father. I wanted to ask for help. But at that moment, a cold reality pierced my heart. You met Dennis. Ezra nodded and continued with tears in his eyes. He just looked surprised to see me. But he rejected me. Even though I hadn't done anything wrong. I squeezed Ezra's hand, feeling his pain. I see. Ezra, you haven't done anything wrong. Ezra broke down crying and buried his face in my chest. Seeing him like this strengthened my resolve to protect him. I decided to confront Dennis. The next morning at breakfast, I brought up Ezra's story. Dennis, Ezra told me yesterday. He went to see you, but you rejected him. Dennis's face contorted as he avoided my gaze. Ariana, I didn't know what to do at the time. But he's your son. We can't abandon him. I said firmly. Ariana, there's nothing I can do, Dennis replied in a dejected voice. Then I'll do it. It's our responsibility to protect Ezra. I said with determination. That day, Ezra continued to tell me the truth. He tearfully explained how lonely he had been and how desperately he had sought help. Mom would hit me every day and wouldn't give me food. I couldn't take it anymore, so I ran away. But I had nowhere to go. So you came to our house. My heart ached as I listened to Ezra's story. Yes. I asked Dad for help, but he. Ezra choked on his words. It's okay now, Ezra. I'll protect you from now on. I held him tightly. That night, as I watched Ezra sleeping, I kept thinking about what I could do to save him. There was still so much I could do to help shoulder his past and brighten his future. Regardless of what Dennis thought, I was determined to fight to protect Ezra. I was prepared to do everything possible to ease Ezra's suffering. The next day, we received word from the police. Evidence of Jessica's abuse had been gathered, and she would be arrested. I breathed a sigh of relief as I told Ezra the news. Ezra, Jessica can't hurt you anymore. She's going to be arrested. I said gently, looking into his eyes. Ezra smiled through his tears. Thank you, Ariana. I'm really grateful. That day, I prepared a new room for Ezra. I renovated part of Ethan's room to create a space for him. Welcoming Ezra into a room filled with Ethan's memories was a big decision for me. After Jessica's arrest, Dennis and I went to the police to hear the details. The evidence of Jessica's abuse of Ezra was beyond imagination. Seeing the evidence, we truly understood how much suffering Ezra had endured. From now on, let's prioritize Ezra's safety, I said to Dennis, and he nodded quietly. Ariana, it's your decision. I'll cooperate. Though there was still hesitation in Dennis's voice, I felt a glimmer of hope in his words. Life with Ezra was a new challenge for us. It would take time to heal the wounds in his heart. But having decided to protect and love him, I was prepared to walk that path. Our bonds as a family would be tested in the process of rebuilding. However, I believed that Ezra's presence would bring us new hope and purpose. For his sake, and for our own, I had no choice but to keep moving forward. Meanwhile, Dennis lost his job. His reputation at work had fallen, and when his affair and hidden child became public knowledge, he lost their trust. When I received this news, I was filled with complex emotions. Anger at his betrayal mixed with anxiety about our family's future. Ariana, how did things end up like this? Dennis collapsed onto the sofa, holding his head in his hands. You reap what you sow, Dennis. I answered coldly, though deep sadness lay beneath my words. Have you ever thought about how much suffering Ezra endured? Dennis said nothing, just hanging his head. It was difficult to see any trace of the man I had once loved in his current state. Jessica's arrest became big news, and her past actions were revealed one after another. As evidence of abuse continued to surface, she faced a long prison sentence. However, this wouldn't heal Ezra's wounds. Jessica can't hurt Ezra anymore. But his emotional scars run deep. I whispered to myself as I watched Ezra sleeping. Meanwhile, Dennis and Jessica's debts came to light. They had both accumulated significant debt. One night, Dennis approached me with a serious expression. Ariana, what should I do? I've lost my job, and the debts keep piling up. I answered calmly, first, think about Ezra. Then, take responsibility for this situation. We have a lot to do. Ariana, I'm truly sorry. I've done something shameful to you and Ethan. Dennis apologized with tears in his eyes. I don't need apologies now. We can only move forward. I said, looking into his eyes. Let's do what we need to do, for Ezra's sake and for our own. Dennis nodded slightly at these words. Though I wasn't sure if he could change, at least we were preparing to take another step forward. We began reviewing our finances and cutting expenses to start a new life with Ezra. We did everything we could to create an environment where Ezra could feel secure. And as I watched Ezra gradually opening his heart, a ray of hope shone into mine. We renewed our determination to walk this path together, dreaming of the day when his smile would fully return. I decided to begin the process of formally adopting Ezra. Welcoming him into our family as a legal member felt like the first step toward brightening our future. However, it wasn't going to be an easy journey. One day, we went to family court. We were there to have Ezra's adoption officially recognized. In court, Jessica claimed her parental rights, testing our resolve. Jessica cried in court, pleading for her rights as a mother. I made mistakes. But I love Ezra. Please, let me have him back. Remembering all the abuse Ezra had suffered, I maintained my composure. Jessica, think about what you did to Ezra. Think about how much he suffered. We can't forget that. The court proceedings continued for several weeks, during which Ezra spent anxious days. My heart ached thinking about the pressure his young heart was under. Ariana, what happens if you lose in court? Ezra asked nervously one evening. Don't worry, Ezra. I will protect you no matter what. You're not alone anymore. I squeezed his hand reassuringly. Finally, Judgment Day arrived. In the quiet courtroom, the judge addressed us, after considering all evidence and testimony, and in the best interest of Ezra, I hereby grant Ariana Brown formal adoption rights as Ezra's mother. At that moment, tears welled up in my eyes. Ezra's face showed relief. His small hand gripped mine tightly as he whispered, "Thank you." As we left the courthouse, we took our first step as a new family. Ezra was no longer alone, and we vowed to love and protect him. Though Jessica showed disappointment and frustration at the court's decision, I was confident we had made the best choice for Ezra. While we would face many challenges ahead, we renewed our commitment to moving forward as a family. Day by day, Ezra began to overcome his emotional wounds. As his smiles increased, brightness seemed to return to our home. Watching his growth became my greatest joy. One morning, Ezra rushed to me before heading to school. "Mom, today we're doing a science experiment with friends at school. I'm so excited." "That's wonderful, Ezra. You're going to have a great day." I felt warmth in my heart seeing his smile. When he returned from school, he eagerly shared the day's events. Today the experiment went well. Everyone praised me. "You worked hard, Ezra." I praised him and shared in his small victory. As Ezra opened up to me more, our bond grew stronger. During dinner time, we all laughed together more often while listening to his daily adventures. "I played soccer with my classmates today. I made new friends too," Ezra said with a beaming smile. "That's wonderful. Time spent with friends is very precious," I responded, feeling his growth. Ezra's past wounds were healing gradually. His nightmares became less frequent, and he began sleeping more peacefully. One night, I entered his room and watched him sleeping soundly. "Ezra, you're such a strong child," I whispered in my heart, gently kissing his forehead. Ezra grew to trust me more, and our relationship strengthened with each passing day. His smiles and the sparkle in his eyes when he talked to me filled my heart with joy. "Mom, thank you. I'm really glad I came here," Ezra said one day, hugging me. "Me too, Ezra. I'm so happy you're here with us," I replied, gently rubbing his back. Together, we built our new life as a family, supporting each other along the way. Ezra's presence brought us new hope, and we vowed to keep growing together. Those days of overcoming past pain and walking toward a new future became our greatest treasure.